Hello and welcome to this month's Practice as Research seminar. It's quite surprising how quickly time flies, and it feels like only just yesterday that we had a session. But yeah, it's been a month already, and today I am really excited to have somebody with me that I'm personally really invested in and interested in. As you all know, the Practice as Research seminar series this year focuses on how we're doing practice as research. And I have been lucky enough to meet our current speaker today, Dr. Beth Curtis, at a conference quite recently, where I heard her speak about what she does, and that essentially she does practice as research as somebody who's navigating the space between being a teacher, a researcher, and a playwright. And obviously, I bounced on that straight away, and I asked her if she would be kind enough to contribute to our seminar series. So I'm really delighted to have her with us today. Beth Curtis has recently completed her doctorate in education with the University of Sunderland, and she's basically gone through her PhD journey as a practitioner, and she's done a bespoke practitioner research program which was designed for teachers in further education. Originally, she had trained as a primary school teacher, and Beth has worked in further education since 2008. She's also taught across vocational and A-level drama and performing arts courses. She's situated in a large further education college in the southwest of England, but she's also working within teacher education now. So she's tutoring and teaching on the PGCE and award programs. Beth holds a first-class degree in drama from the University of Exeter and is interested in applied uses of drama and theatre within social, community and education contexts. And in her thesis, Beth used playwriting as a creative method of data analysis and representation to illuminate the stories of A-level drama students and teachers, with a specific focus on experiences of assessment. And that's the part that I was obviously particularly excited about and interested in. So I'm not going to kind of go into any further detail. I am going to share with you a link to Google Maps. If you would like to put yourself onto the map, feel free, anyone. I've noticed that we've got people here from Barbados, India, Italy, Norway. It's very exciting to see you all. And also, obviously, everyone from the UK too. It's fine to be from gloomy Bolton, for example. So thank you very much for joining us from all of those places. Please feel free to have a look at the map to see where all of our members are coming from and add yourself onto it as well. But for now, I'd like to hand over to Beth for her presentation. As always, I will be monitoring the chat function. So if you've got any questions that you would like to raise later, please feel free to put them in the chat, or otherwise just make yourself known to me so that I can bring you in later. Beth, the floor is yours.
Thank you for such a warm welcome, Nicole. And just before I start, because I'm actually a bit unfamiliar with Zoom, I've been, more used to Teams. Can everybody see?
Yes, we can see the slides. Don't worry. Yes, everything's perfect.
Brilliant. And just to say, I've got some notes. I've got two screens. I've got some notes in front of me. So my eye line there, it dips up and down. That's what I'm doing. Yes, thank you. It's an honour to be with you here today, and I'm delighted to be able to share something of my kind of journey. And very much is a journey through my doctoral research, and as Nicole said, navigating those spaces that I inhabited and continue to inhabit between my teacher, researcher, playwright selves. So my research, as Nicole outlined, very much explores the lived experiences of A-level drama students and teachers, with a specific focus on the relationship between the way and the means within which and through which we learn in drama education, and then the assessment methods which are employed in the current qualification specifications. And to give you the quick headline, the findings of my work are there's a huge jarring there between what we know about how we learn in drama and how students are assessed. So the study very much positions drama at its onto-epistemological centre. And by that, I mean that drama is both the subject under investigation that's being studied, and also the means through which that phenomena is being analysed, interpreted, and understood. So I approached the work first and foremost from my perspective and identity as a drama teacher. And I think my own experience of doctoral research and doctoral education in many ways echoes that of my participants' experiences of the A-level drama curriculum, in that often I found, and that they found, that words alone fall short in being able to articulate lived experience, specifically when that experience is of creative and physical and embodied nature. So I can only describe it as being a deep ache within me, something I really felt inside myself, and a need to be authentic to the research participants, and just this pull that within the project I needed to make something, physically make something that was tangible, that was visceral. And so having started on this bespoke program designed to support FE teachers to get into action research, and I was kind of very much taught about action research and practitioner-led research, I just found that that wasn't really working for me and for the participants and what I wanted to do. So I kind of deviated from this initial proposed path and instead began to explore how the construction of a dramatic play script could interweave both my practice as a drama teacher and my practice as a researcher, in a process that would invite creativity and that very much would welcome the role of the body, my body, the participants' bodies, the bodies of the actors or the people who would later embody the play, and also the audience. So I drew on the work early on of Paulo Freire, who says that only human beings are praxes. And within the teaching of drama, it's commonly accepted that the body is needed in order for the mind to think. And so my practice is entirely rooted in understandings of body praxes as embodied enactments of knowledge. And that kind of follows through really into how I see playwriting. So I don't see playwriting simply as a pen and a piece of paper. It very much is a practical craft. And so I draw on the etymology of the word playwright. And you see we have writing, W-R-I-T-I-N-G, or the playwright with the GH, and that comes from, if we look at it in comparison to wheelwright, as a wheelwright makes a wheel, so a playwright makes a play. And so for me, within the context of my doctoral work, the play is not an appendix or an afterthought or a gimmick. It is very much considered as a living artifact which exists both within and outside of the body of the work. So partway through my academic thesis, I wrote in an interlude which disrupts the formal structure of the thesis document, which I will hold my hands up to saying I struggled with the rigidity of the expectations of what a doctoral thesis should look like. And yes, in pushing back against the grain of expectation, I said, no, the play won't just be an appendix. It's here, it's in the middle, it's the part that's alive, that beats, it's the part that means the most to me. And so the reader is very much directed to come away from the formal document of the thesis, to read the play text as a hard copy in tangible form. And in that physical turning of the pages, the reader acknowledges the embodied life of the play as a method of data analysis, research representation, but also as a piece of performance that will and can continue to have a legacy in the world outside of that academic thesis document, with the potential for further iterations and constructions of meaning. So to kind of backtrack a little bit, and Nicole gave me a very lovely introduction there, but I think it's important to return to where I started when I'm talking about identity and positionality. And so, as was outlined, I completed my undergraduate degree in drama back in 2005. I initially trained as a primary school teacher before really missing my discipline and transitioning to teach in further education, A-level drama, vocational performing arts courses. So I know that we've got some people from different geographic locations and contexts here. So if you're not familiar with the term further education, when I'm talking about FE, I'm referring to post-16 education. And I work in a general further education college, which is a large provider which offers a range of academic, technical and vocational qualifications to people of all ages, although my experience and my research is specifically based with students aged 16 to 18. In 2017, I was encouraged by a colleague and friend to embark on this bespoke practitioner research project, and I got the research bug. And I did initially a short course MA, and I did a collaborative project with another colleague, and then was accepted onto the next phase of the programme, which was an MPhil, and then I transferred to PhD. Now, the reason I tell you this kind of rambling story is because this journey is really central to my continued and developing understanding of what it means to be a researcher. So my identity very much begins with me, Beth, the drama teacher, the FE teacher. And whilst I began the study with curiosity, I also had this really strong sense that research was something other to me. I didn't realise that it was something that I could do. So as the project developed, and I stopped trying to fight against these feelings of imposter syndrome, that, oh, I can't do, I'm not a researcher, I'm just an FE teacher, what are you doing? I learned to kind of embrace my practice as a drama practitioner and really embrace the idea that this could offer me a lens through which to explore that which I was researching. So I didn't start the study with the intention of writing a play. I didn't know I was going to do that, and I certainly didn't consider myself to be a playwright at the time. But in embracing what George Belliver describes as the simultaneity, the multiplicity and the complexity of my lived experiences and evolving identities, I was able to explore how this kind of joyful entanglement of my practice as a drama teacher and my practice as a researcher could open up spaces, and instead of being this obstacle that I perhaps first thought it was. So I was influenced by the work of a scholar called Richard Sallis in describing my identity as tripartite. And by that, I mean, I recognize three versions of self: the teacher, the researcher, and the playwright. So the diagram that you can see on the slide there, created as part of my methodology chapter. And the choice of dotted lines within the Venn diagram is really important to me. So here I'm aligning with the work of Dwight Conquergood and his assertion that a boundary is more like a membrane than a wall, in an articulation of an identity that I very much feel is fluid, is malleable, is open to changing kind of shifts and pulls in direction as relevant and needed and required at the various stages of the research process. So in acknowledging that boundaries are permeable and malleable, with that comes also blurring and messiness. And kind of messy research is something that I've grown to love throughout the course of the journey. And I'm going to name drop Nicole here, because Nicole's work on reflexivity was really important to me as I navigated this and developing an understanding that reflexivity isn't just a tick box exercise. It's something that we engage in as a process as researchers, from conception all the way through to dissemination and beyond. And as a researcher, I was aware of my own subjectivity, while also noting that within the constructs and creative processes of drama education, our subjective experiences and understandings are really important and valued. So I think the other kind of literature, sorry, I want to draw on at this point is Spring, Irwin and Kine's use or description of the term artography as an arts-based form of living inquiry that can be used to explore aspects of the artist's, researcher, teacher's lives. And that was really helpful for me when exploring my identity and positionality. The process of the artographer is one where both text and art interweave to arrive at new understandings of the world, and within a creative space where knowledge is assembled as a result of a dialoguing between my artist, researcher, teacher identities and the data stories. The role of the audience is also recognised, which resonated with me as a drama teacher and practitioner. So as in theatre, where meaning is always a co-constructed act, artography joins that reader or viewer figure into that process of meaning making, adding, as Spring, Irwin and Kine say, layers of intertextual dwelling. So in terms of frameworks for practice, before I move into the more kind of practicalities of how I used playwriting, whilst my work takes influence from the traditions of arts-based research and ethnodrama, so I looked at the work of Menschikowski, of Saldana, of Ackroyd and Toole, I found that Beck et al.'s use of the term research-based theatre was the most fitting methodological framework for the study. Embracing my embodied identities and intersections of self as drama teacher, researcher, playwright, I firmly resisted what I recognised in much of the literature that I was reading around traditional qualitative methods to be the dichotomization of creativity and analysis. And I just love the quote that I've got on the slide there from Laurel Richardson, where she talks about the dinosaurian belief that creative and analytic are somehow contradictory and incompatible. So I looked instead to create a set of practices which would help to create space for the data to show as well as tell our collective stories. And I drew on the work of Eva Bendix Peterson here to help me do that. In the creation of what she describes as being creator. So this understanding that research itself is an act of creation. And so for me, the play is this kind of middle space or this overlapping of what started out as a kind of more traditional foundational way of approaching data collection, and then a kind of post-qualitative arts-based lens in terms of how I then worked with the data, and the play kind of sits in the middle there. So although, as I've just kind of indicated, my study didn't begin its life within that kind of context of post-qualitative onto-epistemologies, about halfway through the process of the doctorate, I began to read those types of literature more widely, and must acknowledge the influence of scholars such as Mirka Koro-Ljungberg, Patti Lather, Elizabeth St. Pierre and Laurel Richardson on my thinking at this stage, and the development of what I would describe as a more relational way of working with and not on data. To be honest, the word data doesn't sit that comfortably with me. To me, I refer to them more commonly as data stories. So I rejected the adoption of a single traditional method for data coding and analysis, and instead constructed, because I align with thinking that methodologies are constructed. So I constructed a reflexive and multimodal set of practices wherein the researcher is led and responds to the needs and wants of the data, and that it was fundamental to me, that I had to listen. I had to listen to what the data was saying and what it was requiring of me as researcher. So kind of toppling that kind of hierarchy of researcher working on data and allowing the data to work on me was really important. And so I developed, as you can see on the screen there, this 4-stage approach to the creative analysis of the data stories from 22 semi-structured interviews I'd conducted with teachers and student participants. Now, this process was really rigorous, but as I mentioned a moment ago, it resisted academic expectations to present the analysis of the data and the discussion of findings as distinct or separable, which was a bit of a battle at times, but I got there eventually. So I'm going to now, just for this kind of second half of the presentation, just talk through each of these stages briefly, and then hopefully there'll be lots of time for discussion. So how did I do it? It's hard when you're constructing assessment practices, when, you know, that I was influenced by the work of lots of scholars who've gone before me, but I also allowed myself to, as I said, to be led by what I felt the data needed and wanted. So each of the video recorded research conversations were initially transcribed. I say initially, actually, I did first of all try digital transcription and packages that do this for you, and immediately just felt that was completely incongruous to what had been said to me in interviews, to what I knew about how I wanted to work and about drama and all of that stuff earlier I said about embodiment, etc. So I went back to what I knew, and I just had a simple A5 notebook for each research conversation I'd held with each participant. And so that choice to transcribe the conversations by hand was really deliberate and really important for me, and allowed me to work more responsively and creatively alongside the data stories. So within each notebook, I used a mixture of verbatim text and images to document the lived experiences of each participant. And this then generated a set of initial codes, if you will. So as well as transcribing what was said, my playwright hat encouraged me to also use the dramatic convention of stage directions to record each participant's body language, gesture, eye contact, nonverbal sounds, idiosyncrasies of speech. And that adoption of a holistic approach to transcribing the whole of the person communicating created these wonderful layers of different types of text, which allowed for an initial interpretation of the raw data in the synthesis of speech, action, reaction, expression, emotion. So I was certainly broadly influenced by traditions of thematic analysis and the work of Braun and Clark, and I went back after that initial transcription phase, returned to the character notebooks and reread them, searching for recurrent patterned topics, words, images, ideas as discussed by multiple participants. But as well as looking for patterns in the data, I was also looking for concepts that had dramatic and performative qualities. And it was at this point I really began to think more like a playwright and started to consider who the characters might be, what the story was that the play was going to tell, and also how it might be told. So if phase one was, to use the phrase of Lynn Butler-Kisber, was the kind of coarse-grained work with the data. Stage two was a fine-grained analysis of those initial transcripts, and it allowed me to begin to develop the play's narrative structure and characters. So the research conversations I transcribed and coded in those character notebooks were then collectively examined in a process which, and I draw on the work of Salas again here, explains enabled conceptual themes to become the play's initial broad scene and plotline elements. So excerpts from the hand-transcribed data were selected and colour-coded in relation to the identified thematic categories / scenic episodes that I was beginning to develop. This was a process that took some really careful negotiation in terms of how the data, what data was selected, what made it into this first draft of the script. And I was ever conscious that the aesthetic and entertainment value of the performance could not overshadow the authenticity and validity of the research. That's really important. It doesn't mean that the data wasn't subject to processes of selection and editing. I'm really transparent about that, as I searched for the most direct way to tell the story that needed to be told. as a drama practitioner, I think my understanding of dramatic conflict and how you kind of build a story or make a piece of theatre that's going to engage an audience was really helpful. However, in ensuring that there was a balance of opinion, that popular ideas were challenged, and kind of opposing opinions or perspectives were provided with the opportunity to respond and offer counter argument in that development of the script. It was at this stage that I also chose to amalgamate the 22 research participants into composite characters, creating character types, which again helped to create dramatic tension and make sure that the participants were represented in terms of their different opinions and experiences. So this is obviously, this process was so complex, took so much time, was so nuanced. I really can only scratch the surface in this short time, but I'm hoping it's going to give you a flavour broadly of the stages. So following stages 1 and 2 of that creative and analytic practice, it was apparent to me that whilst I had a verbatim text that was really rich in theme and image, the script as it stood as a piece of performance, as a piece of drama, really lacked performability. So the coding and categorization and arrangement of the text within this scenic structure had been a necessary and useful process. The script was reading more like a radio play, and it was really missing that physical and visual embodiment of the data stories, which I really wanted to be part of the way in which I worked with and represented and disseminated the data. So I chose to work with 2 peer reviewers who were also playwrights, who offered me constructive feedback on what I'd done so far, and they both were unanimous in highlighting that whilst there was, it was a really good start, I needed to be a bit bolder and more playful and more creative in my practice, and in the exploration and shaping of the text and the data. So using those character notebooks and the first draft of the script as stimuli, I constructed a series of visual and physical imagery in response to my current understanding of the data. So I used dramatic and poetic devices to explore the latent subtext. And in the making of those moments of dramatic action, the artography of my practice, that intersection of art, research, my life as a teacher, really came into its own. And as the findings, which I prefer to think of as illuminations, as they kind of were given the opportunity to move and interact on the stage, the conditions for the data to dialogue with itself and begin to speak back to the research questions were created. And this was a really pivotal point within the process of analysis, and shifted my understanding, interpretation of the data as being kind of information, and moving towards this idea that the data could be embodied, could be alive, that could be in tangible form. So the final stage of the process, which I think was probably my favourite stage, was when I really opened up the research, the work, and started to collaborate with others. Because there's the one thing I know about teaching, and specifically drama teaching or drama practice, it's a collaborative event. You work with other people, and I know I always think better with other people, and so that was really integral to my deepening of iterative spirals of reinterpretation and analysis as I kind of was drawing towards the end of this phase. So I worked with 2 groups of students on extracts from the script, and they practically explored those, and I had the opportunity to watch those extracts be experimented with, refined, and we did kind of Q&A, and that was just amazing to observe the text, or the data, if you will, in this kind of state of physical and embodied reinterpretation, which allowed for a crystallization of the findings, as well as an opportunity to challenge assumptions of truth that perhaps I was holding in relation to the story that was being told. The play was also given a full read through as part of an academic conference. Now, Salis draws on the work of Johnny Saldana to note that research-based theatre shouldn't be judged on the printed script alone, but on the ways in which the audience responds to the text when it was performed. So despite the fact that this was a read-through and not a full performance, the presence of an audience was integral to this experience and allowed for the data to be reinterpreted through the bodies of others, which was both powerful and meaningful for me as the researcher. But as you can see on the slide there, the quote from Delegate Actor 1, who talks about being able to, this experience of being able to embody the data themselves, which added to their own understanding and made it a really kind of meaningful experience. As part of my ethical responsibility, that ongoing practice of ethics to the research participants, I also shared the script with them and invited them to give me feedback. Not all participants responded, but the feedback I did receive was really encouraging and helpful in ensuring the credibility of the findings that have been constructed from those initial research conversations, as well as supporting the validity of playwriting and that choice to use that as a vehicle, not just as a vehicle, as a form of inquiry that can enable academic research to be both artistic and accessible. So in drawing to a close, and in reflection of my practice, I find that the act or the craft of making theatre is very much a process in motion, and I arrive not at an end, but at a resting point. So the potential for the play to have a life outside of the boundaries of the academic thesis opens up further opportunities for reinterpretation and analysis, and accepts very much that findings like this are always in a state of flux and are contextualized through the lens of the viewer. In my position as teacher-researcher-playwright, I am inextricably woven into the fabric of the research. I love this quote from Thrift, which notes that the task of the researcher is being there to hear the world and to make sure that it can speak back. And I think what I found through my study was a support for existing scholarship, which argues that the use of playwriting as a research practice is a robust, reflexive, rigorous form of inquiry and should be considered as credible alongside other more traditionally accepted forms of qualitative inquiry. And I just want to finish by coming to the words of one of the participants in the play, because this is the title of the play and the performance speaks. And I think that's what I want to say really at the end. So I'll read it here, Teacher 2. What you are fundamentally wanting them to do at the end is to make a play, and the performance speaks. That's the whole point. The performance speaks. So that's the end of my formal presentation. That's a little kind of afterthought about my shifting identities. Indentations of form, reminders of the body, overlapping facets of self, in and out of focus. And there's some references there. I've given Nicole my slides, so hopefully if there's any of that's been of interest, you'll be able to follow some of those up afterwards. So I'm going to stop sharing now.
Thank you very, very much. A virtual round of applause. A number of people are applauding to you. I don't know whether you can see that, but yeah, thank you very, very much. There were some comments in the chat function, and I'm obviously going to share that with you later on as well. There is a few people who may want to comment and come in and actually speak to you. But there is one question. Rashmi, do you want to come in, or do you want me to read it out for you? Rashmi, where are you? There you are.
Sorry, yeah, you can read it out, but I can also read it out.
No, that's fine. You read it out.
So I just wanted to say hi, Beth. A thought just popped into my mind. So I apologize if you've already talked about it during your presentation and I didn't pay attention to that. But I wanted to understand how you worked around the ethical aspect of ownership of the play. And since you included students in the performance of the play, I'm assuming that these performers were not the participants themselves, whose voices you had analyzed and interpreted as a play. And so I wanted to understand how you navigated and negotiated that aspect of the ownership and the use of the interpretation by actors who were not participants themselves.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and it took quite some careful thinking and negotiation. I think, as I said at the start, I didn't know when I started the project that what was going to come out of it was a full-length play. I initially anticipated that I might just write up sections of the interview transcripts into kind of fictional or theatrical vignettes, and would use those at points within the thesis. And so I applied for we did basically a second ethical consent, which went to the university. So when I decided that I wanted to write a play, I went back to the participants and asked for their consent for me to do that. And as I said towards the end there, in that final stage of the process, it was really important to me that the play went back to them, that they had the opportunity to read the play and the opportunity to give feedback on whether or not, to what extent had the play, had I been able to theatricalize in their words in a way that were authentic to their lived experience. I think in terms of other people acting the play, or taking on, embodying the voices of others, I think because the participants were drama teachers and students, that I don't think that was a particular barrier, in that there's an understanding that when you write something, or when you perform something, you're giving it over to the world. You are giving it out into the world with an understanding that it will be re-embodied and reinterpreted. That you can't ever, one interpretation of a play will never be the same. It has multiple different interpretations, and I think that's what was I find that really interesting and exciting. So I had no kind of comeback from any of the participants in terms of concern around that. And I think for me, it's what's exciting, that kind of hermeneutical, iterative kind of spiraling of interpretations of the finding is what is really exciting for me. But it certainly takes, as you say, a lot of kind of time and care and thought and consideration about how to treat people's data with a practice of care. Yeah, I don't know if I've answered that.
Thank you.
No, I think that was wonderfully answered. Thanks, Beth.
No worries.
Thank you very much, Beth. I would like to bring in Sally, because she's got a comment to that conversation as well. Sally, would you come in, please?
Yeah. Hi, Beth. That was fantastic. Thank you. You're talking to an ex-drama teacher, now a therapist working in a university teaching research methods and arts-based research methods. One of the students we were working, I did a short arts-based research session, and always talk about co-participants, co-collaborators, rather than, like you said, doing research with and sending things back. And they asked one student asked an interesting question about, well, who's the author of the story? Particularly if they're doing masters, it's like, and it was a lovely ethical question, like, do we include the co-collaborators actually as authors? I don't know what your thinking would be around that.
Yeah, I mean, I think if I were going to do the project again, I would have redesigned the data collection phase. So I think whilst the program, the bespoke practitioner research project I was on, was incredible, and I wouldn't have known where to start without it. It did push you down a particular path in terms of data collection. And it wasn't really until I'd collected the data that I realized, I don't know if actually this really sits well with what I now feel I need to do. And so I think if I was going to redesign it, I would certainly want to invite certainly some of the students and the teachers to be co-participants in the generation of and the construction of the text. But I think that idea of authorship is really interesting and did sit uncomfortably with me for quite a long time. I found it really hard to put myself down on the title page of the play, on the book, to say a play by Beth Curtis, because I do feel like it is in that I constructed it, but really I see it as something that belongs to all of us, all of the people that I spoke to, but more widely than that, all teachers and students of drama as well. So I think, yes, for me, authorship is definitely something that I see as a collaborative enterprise. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Can I just pitch in here? I mean, I'm forever, like advocating for people to be named as co-collaborators, co-constructors, and co-authors. But sometimes I also think that as researchers, we actually have the duty to make sure that our participants don't come to any harm. Yeah. And I mean, it depends on the research topic that you're exploring, but even with your topic where you're talking about people's experience of assessment, for example, can we make sure that they don't come to any harm if they say something that's against the system, that that goes against the grain? So maybe we do have a duty there to actually say, you know what, it's probably better that people don't know that you've been part of this project, so sometimes it's like that you have to kind of navigate that space in a way.
Absolutely. And that's why I didn't. So although that kind of in that initial transcription where I was transcribing stage directions about what people were doing physically, their idiosyncrasies of speech, their accents, I didn't include those in the text that made it into the play. So that was very much important within my initial analysis and interpretation. But for sure, there were some things that were going to be too identifiable to include in a script that was then going to be disseminated publicly. So they were useful and important for me as part of the process, but I took them out when it came to putting them into the script. And that was also partly behind my behind my thinking about amalgamating the characters to become character types. Yes. As well, to preserve the anonymity of the individuals there. Yes. As well.
Yes, thank you. And to be honest, so I'm working, some of you will know that I'm working within the space of social fiction, and the process that you're describing is very much the same, that it's often easier to kind of amalgamate stories and create composites, because then you can protect individuals' identities a little bit more, and privacy as well. Can I just ask, Beth, there's a question in the chat function, and there's something that I had raised as well. You were talking in your presentation, you were saying that your peer reviewer were asking you to be bolder with your creations. Yeah. And you said that you yourself were constantly kind of navigating that space of actually being bold and pushing the boundaries, and other people, like perhaps not so keen on you to push the boundaries quite as much. Yeah. So can you talk us through a little bit about how you navigated that supervisory experience and that supervisory relationship? How did that work? How did that pan out on the ground?
Yeah, it's really interesting. And I think because I was supervised within a faculty of education, I think if I'd been within a drama department, I would have had a different experience, because practices research is so common. And you make an installation and that's your thesis or a piece of performance, but that kind of intersection of creativity within different disciplines was really interesting. I was very fortunate to have an incredibly supportive supervisor who understands and values art and creativity within education to the extent that I do. So he really kind of fought for me to be able to present the work in the way in which I felt it needed to be presented. But it wasn't easy. And I initially had to convince him when I said, no, I'm going to send a hard copy of the play here to the examiners, and they have to read it like this. And I don't really want a traditional findings chapter, because my argument is that the play is the findings, and that was tough. But I think in some ways, I suppose my naivety about having come to it from this perspective of teacher and drama teacher, I just kind of charged on ahead with it. And I think because I had more of that in me than I did kind of an academic researcher background, I just went with it because I was just determined that this was what was going to happen. But interesting you say that. I've actually I'm working currently with my supervisor. We've just had an abstract accepted for a special issue journal that's going to come out next year, which is exactly about the impact of creative practice on the changing landscape of doctoral education. Because I think that there is there's a need for it, and there's an opening up of those spaces, of those dialogues around what's acceptable in terms of, you know, what makes something academic. And I write a lot about that because that's something that comes up as this kind of thorny and enduring dichotomy in, you know, in drama education about, is it theory, is it practice, is it vocational, is it academic? Well, of course, it's all of those things, and those divisions are really unhelpful. And so I think I was, because of the nature of what I was writing about, that kind of bolstered my confidence to push back with no, I'm going to present this work in the way in which it needs to be presented, because otherwise I'm doing a disservice to, it felt completely incongruous to what the research participants had said to me.
Yes.
I felt it would be a disservice. I can't write about writing as being an embodied and practical craft and then just give you a standard thesis.
I totally get that. Yes, absolutely. I'm totally with you on that. So can I just bring in, I'm going to bring in somebody here who's got another question around creative practice, but can I just pick you up very quickly? Which journal did you talk about when you said that you've just submitted to a special issue?
Yeah, it's early days, so we just had the abstract submitted, so it's not, we're not at the end stage yet, but it's going to be oh, it's gone completely out of my head.
It's fine, we'll catch up on it.
Yes, I will let you know. You know, and something's just popped out of your head.
That's fine, that's fine. The other thing that I also wanted to kind of add to what you were just saying, to kind of give hope to other people who are here in the room, you said that there is a need to talk about that creative practice within doctoral research. I think there is an appetite for it as well. I think there are so many of us working in that space now that, you know, it's something that people can't really keep quiet anymore. And there was somebody who put a comment in the chat box saying that Cliven and Grant, autoethnographers, are talking about troubling and we need troublemakers. And I've added to that, Pam Bernard is talking about rebellious research and being rebellious in that space. So it's kind of similar along the similar notions. Craig, can I bring you in, please?
Yeah, certainly. Thanks, Beth, for a really interesting presentation. I'm senior lecturer in acting at the Arts University Bournemouth, and I'm also a playwright. So your presentation was really interesting to me. I just wanted to ask whether your the academic approach to playwriting, if at any point you consider that was detracting from the kind of the creative enjoyment of writing a play, or whether those two kind of approaches, I don't know, enhanced each other. I understand that the two approaches are not necessarily mutually exclusive, but I just was interested to hear any thoughts on that, if my question makes sense.
I think I really struggled with that idea, and I still do struggle with the idea of calling myself a playwright, because it's not something I can say I have ever studied in any great detail, other than within my own drama education. My experience really is, obviously as a teacher, is helping young people to make theatre about the world in which they live, and to say something about, that they want to speak out into the world. So I did do a lot of research around verbatim playwriting, and was heavily influenced by that in terms of how, and really supportive. I found that really supportive. But yeah, it's really different. I think balancing that space, I did have to keep reminding myself that this is a research project as well, and that kind of navigating and negotiating that those boundaries between staying, like with verbatim theatre, you can't find something, like in research, you can't find something that isn't there for the sake of making a more interesting or a more exciting piece of drama. And that was tough at times, because I'd be, looking at the data, at the research conversations, sometimes kind of hoping to find, a choice line or something that just wasn't there. But I think that when I started to be more brave in terms of creating, so I created a kind of omnipotent kind of examiner figure who features widely within the play, and really explored the use of the ensemble as well as a vehicle for kind of meaning making and storytelling within the play. That was a bit of a breakthrough as well, and I suppose allowed me to bring my own creativity and myself into that space as well, within the play. So I actually found it a really kind of creatively nurturing process, and I think just I don't know how I would have got to the end of the doctorate without it, I think, because I felt like it was a space where I could be me. Might really be me and engage in my own creative practice. I don't know if I answered your question very well.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you very much.
I just say as well, if anyone's interested in reading the play, obviously when I submitted the thesis, it did have to go in as appendix in the actual one that sits in the online repository. But I'm really happy to share that with anybody who would like to read it.
Thank you very much, Beth. That's really, really kind of you. And I'm sure some people will take you up on that offer. So thank you very much for that. Can I just say there was one person who has put a quick question into the chat box as well, saying, did your examiners see the performance?
No, so a full performance of the play was kind of, where research you have to draw a line, has to stop somewhere.
Yes.
I think we did toy with that idea, and no, they didn't. But for me, that's kind of what I was getting at in that last slide. Really, is for me the kind of end of the formal kind of doctorate process is just a resting place, and I'm very hopeful that there will be further performances of the text or extracts of the text in the future. But no, they didn't actually see it, but they did. In fact, one copy of the play got taken by hand all the way over to Australia, which I loved as well. I love this kind of physical, because obviously in drama, the copy of the play is something that's handled, it's written on, it gets dog-eared and T-marked, and I love all of that as well. And I'm really interested in exploring that kind of physical journey of the play text and the research as an artifact, as a living artifact as well.
Thank you very much. There's a question there. Could you have added as a video of the play? And then, there is something there like, yes, Sally, I agree with you. Kip Jones at Bournemouth University fought for the doctoral students to have the same parameters of an arts doctorate. Unfortunately, I suggest that a lot of traditionalism is still happening, and the changes are perhaps not quite as quick as we would want them. But I think communities like this one are really, really important, because we obviously get to know each other's names, so we can reach out to one another when we need external examiners. So it's that kind of thing that's quite important too, that actually, like networks like this one exist, so that we are actually seeing the kind of work that's going on in the field, and that's a little bit broader. And I know that creative approaches for data analysis and dissemination are becoming more prevalent across all sorts of areas. I mean, there are people in the hard sciences writing poetry based on data. So it's something that's becoming more and more of a thing. So hopefully we'll be able to change the landscape a little bit in that respect. Thank you very, very much, Beth. I really, really appreciate you being here. I'm quite conscious of the time, and I always make sure that we finish earlier rather than later. I don't want people to rush off to the next meeting. I'm going to share a few links in the chat box for you so that you can connect with me over all sorts of different kinds of YouTube channels and newsletters, etc. I'll give you a quick heads up for the next talk, which is going to happen in December. Sticky Sick Duck, researching equity in the Canadian public arts. So this is somebody who's a researcher in residence, and Shanice is going to be talking about her experience of practice as research, as she calls it, research at the methodological framework of research creation. So that's the focus that we're going to have. Again, you can subscribe to the PAR YouTube channel, the Buzzsprout channel, and it's on the research website. And if you would like to find out more about the next event, do sign up to the newsletter. I always post information there. And also you will get the information on the website as well. So again, thank you very, very much for having been here, for contributing to the discussion. I didn't get to ask mine, but I hope that I can ask Beth at some other point, and that we can catch up over all things practice as research again.
Be fantastic. Thanks for having me. Thank you for everyone's excellent comments and contributions. Lovely to be here.